Evil is back. The Drool King Lotor has returned with a dark energy that can destroy the galaxy. Our only hope? The Voltron Force, a team of 5 heroic pilots that control 5 awesome robot lions. When Lotor's monstrous road beasts attack, the lions come together to form Voltron, defender of the universe.
Oh! Let's Voltron! Oh! Let's Voltron! Oh! Let's Voltron!
Welcome, Voltron fans. This is Marc Morel, your host for Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast. We're here for another exciting Voltron Force episode review. I have my co-host with me, Greg Tyler. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, Marc Morel. Hello, Voltron fans across the universe. We're back to review another episode of Voltron Force, and we have a new guest to help us with this review.
Yes, for the first time ever, we would like to welcome Angie. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Why don't you get into a little bit about how you became a Voltron fan in the first place?
So obviously I'm pretty young, and like a lot of younger fans, I started with Legendary Defender. I didn't get into it when it first aired on Netflix, like the first season, but when the second season came around, it like snowballed from there. I finished all of Legendary Defender. I did love it. It's a love-hate relationship, to be honest. But in the middle of it, my friend who she's really into like the history of shows, and when she heard that it's a reboot, she's like, oh, cool, let's look up the other versions. And then one night she showed me Voltron Force, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the characters. I fell in love with the ideas. Like I haven't stopped thinking about it since.
Wow.
That's great. Have you been watching it very recently, within the last couple of years, or how early did you jump in on it?
I think so. I think season 2 came out in 2016, right? It's like it wasn't like the whole thing finished in a year frame, which is insane. So 2016 was when I started, so probably around that time. And like I wasn't really like in the beginning, yes, I like fell in love with it, but it was such an old show even at that time. Like now we're 11 years into it.
Yeah,
right.
Like after I want to say maybe season 4, season 5, that's when I finally realized, oh, there's still fans out here. There's still people who really like the older versions of Voltron, and I'm just like, I'm not alone in it.
That's awesome.
So if I had to ask, and I'm going to ask, which of the shows do you prefer, Legendary Defender or Voltron Force?
Voltron Force. I'm gonna be honest, Voltron Force. Like I do love the animation of Legendary Defender. I love just the way the robot looks. I love the way all the character looks. But Voltron Force has a very special thing with its story because it's older fans bringing in their ideas. That's what I've noticed with all the episodes. Like we bring back Sven, like you already did the Ghost and Lion review. They brought back Sven. They gave him a kid. This is a lot of fan stuff where they're like, hey, what if we bring like next gen stuff? Fans have always loved the next generation of Voltron Force ideas. He's starting that with Sven's kid, and then we also have that with the cadets. We also have the idea that our pilots now, like maybe they were young adults or teenagers in the original Defender of the Universe. Now they're adults. Now they're retiring. That's like an insane idea to have. So people really put love into Voltron Force, and I see it in every episode.
It's great.
Yeah.
I will tell you that while I think just from a pure narrative perspective, I think Voltron Legendary Defender is it's an unfair comparison because Legendary Defender was deliberately crafted and has a deliberately written beginning and end. So it's not a fair comparison. But I do think, and I'm very sorry to all the major Legendary Defender fans, I think Voltron Force is the best spiritual successor to the original show. You know what I mean?
They do really good. They do really good with like bringing back the ideas from it, and then Legend Defender, like you said, it's its own contained thing. Like it's a hard reboot. It's just the 5 multicolored heroes all band together to save the universe in a giant robot powered by the power of friendship. Like, love that. But also, we're bringing the history back with Voltron Force, and it's great for like the newer viewers and also like the old fans who've grown up with Defender of the Universe, then Voltron: The Third Dimension, which I have watched too. animation's funky, but I love the story.
Oh, good.
And then again, Voltron Force. So I'm like, oh, yes,
Well,
good. Give me the lore.
awesome. Well, if you are
That's awesome.
interested, when we get around to reviewing Voltron: The Third Dimension in more detail, if you are interested, we may invite you on and have you share your thoughts on that show if you like. All right.
Yes, for sure. Oh my goodness. I just remember this one episode. I think it was like episode 4. It's basically where Hunk gets like manipulated by Hagar, if you remember that one.
Mm,
Favorite episode. Right there.
wow.
Favorite episode. Like, yes, everyone is getting hurt today.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, that show's got some gems in it too. So, Mark, do you have any preferences you want to share about Voltron shows?
Well, I like Voltron Force because it has a special place in my heart because it really brought me back to the franchise because, Greg and I were fans of the original show back in 1984. But it wasn't really until Voltron Force came out in 2011 that I really came back into the franchise completely. And wow, it really brought me back hard because this was the time when social media was really blossoming and Twitter was there. And we had the opportunity while we're watching the show on Nicktoons to actually chat with the producers of the show. So it was really special in that. And then I got to watch it with my son, who at the time was about 9 or 10 years old when that first came out. And we watched it together. And that was a big thing for me. And so Voltron Force is always going to be special in that way. Now, when it comes to the fact that you're talking whether it's a sequel or an original or a reboot of the original, this was the truest sequel in my mind because it actually had, well, these are the old time Voltron Force members, and then we're bringing on cadets that could possibly replace the regular Voltron Force members. And it had aspects that we had never seen before, like each of the lions becoming, the center, so that was a special thing too. And there were some aspects as it was going along, like Voltron Girl. There was a little girl who had cosplayed as Voltron in real life. And they actually brought that on the show in one of the episodes. And that was just amazing to me. It was even it was a small sliver of it, but it just, wow, that's incredible that they could do that.
Yeah.
And, I do like Voltron Legendary Defender and the fact that it's 78 episodes and that it was built from beginning to end and everything. And the animation was terrific and everything, but I still have a special place for Voltron Force. So Angie, do you have any merchandise from Voltron that you care to share with us?
This one is going to be very fun for you, Mark, actually, because I do have the 30th edition that you helped write.
Oh, wow. Where did you get that?
I think I got the last one off of the official Voltron store. I remember getting the invoice, the receipt, and it had handwriting last one on it.
Wow.
So I got really excited that I bought it.
That's cool.
That's
Congratulations.
awesome. That is so awesome. That was a really special thing to put together for the fans.
Yeah, I love this book. Honestly, there's like some details that I'm iffy on, but that's with all fans. All fans have their own ideas, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But I love seeing like the Voltcoms. There's turnarounds. They're turning on the characters. We get more information on them. We get their weapons. We get like landscape shots. We have planet shots of like Eris, Ariel, Balto. I'm not sure if we get Earth, but like, oh, for me that is a holy grail for like information of world building and everything. I'm like, oh, thank you.
So you're a lore junkie then?
Yes, I really am.
Yeah, I am too. I think it's really fun stuff to dive into the universe and see all the little details that they kind of reveal in little snippets over the course of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what else do you have?
I have all 6 of the comics.
Oh, nice. Viz Media.
Yes, they're really good. I can't remember which one is my favorite because I don't read them all that often. It might be Tournament of the Lions, actually, just because we never see Larmina except for like maybe in one episode that's coming up, I think, Hungry for Voltron. Where Larmina really gets to be a diplomat, even though in the episode I'm very picky with her, for lack of better words. I'm like, you can be better, but okay, I'll let it slide. But like Tournament of Lions is really like, if this is supposed to be a season 2 for Voltron Force, she really grew. She's really a good leader. Like even if she doesn't get the throne, like as Allura's successor, because Allura is, she's supposed to have an heir as a princess. If she doesn't get the throne, she'd be a good leader either way.
Yeah.
No matter where she ends up.
I love that story in part because it raises a very good question. Why is it that Voltron defends the universe, but the pilots, the current generation of pilots is from a pretty small number of planets?
That's fair. Yeah. Like one thing that like you're saying, yeah, like they're very small. Like one thing I want to mention about Larmina is I have a personal headcanon that Larmina isn't blood related to Allura. Like just because of their hair color difference, I'm like, hey, this kind of looks like Paluxian red ginger kind of hair. I'm like, what if we run with this? So I just had this idea in my head that which one was it? It was the Shelter from the Storm, right? Where they had the nightmares where she like gets home, she's like, what's Lotor doing here? And he calls her a foundling. It's like, oh, are you adopted? Are you brought in by Allura? And I'm like, we can work with this. She's probably a noble from a different planet, preferably Pollux. And Allura is like, cousin planet. It's her family, really. So she's taking her in and raising her as her own. It's like, this works. This is good.
We've had many discussions about how is Allura Larmina's aunt, and even with Jeremy Corey, who was one of the supervising producers with this show, and it just basically could be interpreted as maybe Allura took her in and found her and raised her as her own niece, or there was this long lost sister that we never heard of, something like that. But it seems to me it would be more inclined to be more like an adopted niece,
which I think makes it all the more special because like I can't remember, from Go Line, I think she's like, we get more backstory from Forfalla. I think her family was officially killed, so she was a war orphan. So I think that makes it more special because not only is like Lance's backstory from the comics, and I think from V3D too, where his entire colony from the planet, they're all gone. He's the last survivor. We don't know anything about Key's parents, but a lot of people think they both died. Same thing. Pidge is adopted. Pidge and Chip are adopted from Defender of the Universe. Punk is the only one, I believe, with like an actual family, like blood related. They're still alive. They're still, hoping to hear from him. But everyone is from like they're found family. They all connected together, and now Allura is like seeing another little girl, and she's like, "Oh, you're just like me, and I'm not going to leave you alone the same way I was." So she took her in, and that makes it all the more special.
I love
that. And in this episode, we see how both Allura and Larmina have the knowledge of the hieroglyphics and the ancient writings and all that, and how Allura taught her that, probably.
Yeah, I was thinking Nanny. If Nanny was still in the picture by the time Larmina was growing up, then royal studies all the way.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you have there?
I do. I have this sword, I think. It's from, I found it on eBay.
From Ruby's, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes, I did find it on eBay and immediately bought it because I'm pretty sure it's like the only physical toy we have that's available to be bought for fans. So I'm like, oh, I need it. I want it.
Yeah. I bought this many years ago and just opened it up recently. This is the Halloween costume. Okay.
I did see the costume though. I think it was really funny. Honestly, the picture they post for it is funny. So unnecessary, but like it shows it off. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, one of the best things that you could get for Voltron Force was the party items. You know, that was one of the big merch items for Voltron Force because there wasn't much from Voltron Force. And, you know, you could get, what was it, plates and cups and tablecloths and stuff like that if you were having a Voltron party, and even some cake decorating things.
I think the Voltron store found some like in stock that, and they're like doing. I don't know if you've been looking at their Instagram, but they've been
Yes.
raffling. And yeah, I saw them, and I'm like, I want it, but I don't think I have the money. Like, I can justify spending it on party supplies that I will never use.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
I know the feeling.
I think there was even a cardboard stand-up similar to the one that you have behind you there, Greg.
Yes, there was like a cardboard character cutout. I have
Yeah.
not been able to track it down myself. But we do know some folks who were able to find it back when the show was still in production.
Right.
But yeah, that would have been a fun thing to have.
Yeah.
You do
So-
some digging for like older stuff. So you know how Nickelodeon does, like they switch out at the shows on their website to
Yeah.
move in new ones.
Yep.
So we were lucky enough, or I was lucky enough, that someone did archive it on the Internet Archive. So I was able to find like the character bios. I was able to find, like, I think there was the press on Voltron for your shirts. So
Yeah.
if you have like the
Mhm.
specific paper, you could print
Mhm.
it. That's what I found. So I'm like, oh no.
Did you find that on the Wayback Machine?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay.
That's some cool stuff.
Yeah.
I want to show something I have not shared on the podcast before, because you're such an enthusiastic Voltron Force fan. Mark, you've seen this very recently, when we had our video chat a couple weeks back. I have been working on a project for the last couple years, on and off. Let me see here. I am bummed that Voltron Force toys were never made, so I am in the process of designing a 3D printable Voltron Force set of lions. I have been slowly working on this, and the idea is, they've made Voltron toys for all the other shows, but not for the show where the lions are reconfigurable. So I am still this is not in any way the final product. The body in particular is going to be completely redesigned, but the idea is that all 5 lions would be made with a very similar set of proportions, and then each one would have its own custom details, like the wings of the black lion, the spikes of the red lion, the cannons on the green and yellow lions, and the little wings of the blue lion. And basically the idea is that this would be able to combine with any of the robots as the center. And if you've watched the show or are familiar with any of the older toys, you'll know that traditionally the arm lions are the dinky ones, the leg lions are the mid-sized ones, and the black lion is the giant one. And my little cheat for this, because obviously in cartoons they cheat all the time, and that
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
cheat with the toy is that whatever lion forms the center will basically require you to put on a set of armor to sort of beef it up, so that it actually looks like it could be a torso before you connect anything else to it. So the idea is that this is, again, the body is in no way the finished product. The head is fairly close. It's low resolution right now, but it's fairly close. And I do have another file where the robot face will fold out. So I've been working on this a little while, but the idea is that you'd fold up the legs of this guy, you'd stick the armor on this guy, and then you would transform the armored lion into the torso. The other 4 lions, unarmored, would become the legs and arms. And then when you switch centers, you remove the armor from the old center lion, put armor on the new center line, and then reconnect them. So that's the deal. Got a lot more work to do, but it's getting there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're on a new passion project for this. This is awesome.
Well, thank you.
Honestly, I'm already in love with it. Maybe you should keep it the chest as it should. They're really blocky anyway, so.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I want it to look more like the thing on TV, but we'll see how it goes. So anyway,
Have you done any work as an artist for Voltron Force?
So I am a fan artist. Like, a lot of my work, or most of it at least, is all Voltron Force. Like, when I tell you Voltron Force, I mean like obsession, like level at that point. I'm a fan artist. I do a lot of fan art for different shows. specifically Voltron Force. I'm a big Pidge fan, so a lot of my work has to do with Pidge.
Cool.
Just because I love him so much.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. So these are my redesigns for them. I do love their uniforms because I think they're a lot sleeker than the original ones, and compared to like Legendary Defender, where those are armor based, I think it's really cool that they have like flight suits and then they can make them into armor. Like that's really something I really love. But I personalize them more. So like with Hunk, he has short sleeves, so I added Pidge with short sleeves because they work in the hangar. Heath has more long sleeve stuff just because he's wearing darker colors. So I'm like, oh, if he ever goes like back on the run, or he's usually the one scoping stuff out. To be honest, might as well have a full black or a full dark colored uniform so he can sneak around like that. I was also really mad when they cut off his mullet, so I'm like, no, we're gonna give him a ponytail.
We're keeping
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we're gonna give him a ponytail instead. We're gonna make it worse.
Okay.
And then specifically a change that I'm like really into is Pidge's visors. I was really weirded out by Pidge's goggles just because they never clasped onto his ears or anything, and it looked like they were almost suction cupped to his face, but I knew they weren't. Especially in Flash Form Go when we see him like move them with his hands. So I'm like, okay, they're not stuck on them. They're not balancing on his nose though. So I just gave him a visor and went, all right, futuristic, we're good. Let's go.
That's cool. That's great.
That's really cool. I love that you did some redesign, and are the lion logos up across the top? Are those your original work too? I don't recall seeing those.
These ones?
Yeah.
The background I have currently?
Yeah.
No, I think it's from Damon Labont, I think. Devon Labont.
Oh,
Okay.
If you guys remember. Yeah, if you guys know his name, that's who made it. I found his portfolio online, and all of it is from like Voltron Force. He did like the character designs. I think he did not character designs, but he did the lighting. He did some backgrounds, which were gorgeous. I gotta remember where it is, but I'll find it soon. Whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found it in his, what's it called? Yeah, his portfolio, and I was like, oh, nice, something I haven't seen before.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've been to Damien's page, but I'd forgotten that specific image. The one that intrigues me the most is the one of Alfor's tomb, because there are all these cables and pipes leading into it, and it just makes me wonder what was the plan there? He's clearly somehow plugged in to the systems of the castle somehow, but what was the design? I just wonder, and I mean in the lore, what were they trying to accomplish there? I mean, knowing Alfor is gone, what was going on there?
I mean, hasn't Alfor always been like a ghostly figure? Like there, I don't know. Maybe there's some mystical thing. Like maybe it's not like steam or anything. Like I don't know. I'm rolling off like my tongue right here. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe there's like I know there's ideas with like flowers giving like life back to people, like maybe not reviving them, but like being so Allura can actively talk to her father more, instead of him just being like a ghost who hasn't really moved on for like a minute.
That's great.
Wow.
It's a fun idea. All right. Well, shall we jump into the episode review then?
Yes. Why don't you give us the details on this episode, Greg?
All right. So this is the 19th episode of Voltron Force, production number 119. It originally aired March 7th, 2012. As with all the episodes, this was directed by John Delaney, whom we were privileged enough to interview in a prior podcast. The story is by Todd Garfield. It was written by Brandon Sawyer. The cast are all the usual hero voice actors. Ashley Ball is voicing Allura and Daigo. Doron Bell Jr. plays Vince. Shannon Chan Kent plays Larmina. Andrew Francis is Lance. Giles Penton plays Keith. Ty Olson is Hunk and the Smith, or the Blacksmith. Vincent Tong is Daniel, and Sam Vincent is Pidge, and Chief Callan of the Lion Riders. And that's it.
All right. Awesome. So we start off in this episode in the hangar. So if you recall, we had Black Lion having some problems with its nexus. So we're closing in on Vince, who looks nervous, and Vince says, are you sure this is a good idea? And then you get a bigger picture of Black Lion and you see everybody else around. And Pidge says, science isn't about being sure, Vince. It's why we call them experiments. So what's happening here is they've been talking about what can we do about, Black Lion's Nexus. And of course, we see Keith and the others, and Keith says, I'm not thrilled about this either, Pidge. Every time we mess with Black Lion's broken Nexus, bad things happen. And Pidge says, true, but even worse things are going to happen if we don't do something. Pidge actually runs a tablet. They actually show a tablet running over the Nexus, and it's like an X-ray looking at the Nexus. And Pidge says, there's Hegarium in there now, spreading like an infection. We're leaking power at an alarming rate. If we don't repair this Nexus soon, we could lose the Black Lion. So that kind of convinces Keith, okay, yeah, we have to do this now. And he actually looks at Vince when he says this, and he says, do it. Now we're thinking, oh, Pidge is going to do something. No, this is Vince doing something. This is Vince doing his thing where it goes out of his fingers and then attaches to the Nexus of Black Lion. So Vince says, okay, I'm linked. Just give me a second to sort out. And then, whoa. And then all of a sudden, Black Lion goes a little bit berserk, bolts to life, thrashes around, does like bucking like a bronco. And Vince says, I tripped the security protocols. Keith says, keep him contained. Pidge, can you shut him back down? But all of a sudden, the Black Lion shoots and breaks things apart, and Larmina and Hunk get knocked down, and Black Lion just shoots right out the hangar and goes outside. What do we think at this moment?
I think it's kind of funny that Keith said to try to contain Black Lion. Like, oh yeah, no, it's not part of the Defender universe or anything. Just a normal lion, you can definitely contain thin metal. Not like he's like 1,000,000 feet or anything. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Just open up a can of Meow Mix or cow can or whatever the.
I mean, Pidge is good, but Pidge isn't that good.
Yeah.
So the rest of the team are now looking at Pidge, who is now tuned into one of the room's video screens with an exterior view. And on the screen, the whole Voltron Force can see 5 colored lights heading into the sky. And Lance turns to Keith and says, Keith, I do believe your lion is a bad influence on the other kids.
10 out of 10. That's what makes this show so lovable. Just Lance's sass, back to back.
Yeah,
right.
Agreed.
So I thought that was awesome because, Lance is just pointing out it's Keith's lion that's causing the problem here.
This wouldn't have happened if he still had his mullet.
Right.
Just saying.
His mullet contained the brain cells. We get it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we see in the next scene is something you rarely ever see in this show. The whole Voltron Force in a separate spacecraft.
Yeah, that's kind of a new thing, or at least a unique thing.
Yeah.
A rare
So,
thing. Yeah.
So they've lost all their lions, so they have to go out in a separate spacecraft, and they're trying to find them. And as they're cruising around, Pidge and Hunk go over some star charts on the navigational screen. And Hunk says, well, maybe if we track their energy signatures. Pidge says, we'd have to filter out solar interference, correct for gravitational warp, and that's not even factoring the size of the search radius. And of course, there's a lot of this scientific mumbo jumbo that Pidge is spouting. And then all of a sudden on the screen, they see an image of somebody that is calling them. And it's Callan from the Lion Riders on Ariel. So Chief Callan says, greetings, Voltron Force. And Keith says, Callan, what happened? Trouble on Ariel? And then Callan looks around and says, actually, I believe we found something of yours. And we get to see a view behind him of the 5 lions landing on Ariel and running toward one of the planet's temples. So the lions have gone to Ariel. What do we know about Ariel?
Desert planet, basically. Sierra, if I remember right. Yeah, I remember from
Lion Riders
I
Return.
can't remember no, not
Yeah.
that one. It's
Nope.
after Wade gets defeated. His lion gets taken to Ariel. That's what I remember.
Oh, that's right. Wade's lion, right.
They're rehabbing his lion, and I'm like, yes, he deserves it.
Yeah. So with the Lion Riders on Ariel, they're obviously friends of the Voltron Force. But we also knew we learned some things the last time that we were on Ariel, that there might be some involvement with Voltron on this planet.
Right.
And so you can understand now why there's a connection between the lions and this planet. So we're going to learn more as we go along here, because this one's a very good episode for learning a little bit more about the history of Voltron.
Yeah, and I will point out that we just finished out the teaser. So the main credits start now. That's a whole lot of action happening in just a couple of minutes. So
Yes.
I really like the efficiency of what they do here. They don't waste any time. The action starts, we set up the premise, and we know where they're going to be after the commercial break.
Yeah, and they actually spend the whole rest of the episode on Ariel.
Yep.
And as you can see, the picture behind Greg right there, that's towards the end of the episode, and you can see what the landscape of Ariel is like.
Yep. It's a desert to those who are listening and have no video component and have not seen the episode.
Right. So as they arrive on Ariel, Keith says, "Lion Riders, always good to see you." Now, I want you to know, because we have the script with us, and thank you, World Events Productions, for providing the scripts again. There was a scene that they kind of took out here, and I wanted to go over it a little bit, because typically a lot of the things that they have in the episodes may make the episodes go longer, and they cut them out for time.
Mm-hmm.
But they may also cut them out for the type of content that they are. In this, I think it was more meant to be humorous. Like in this case, what could have happened is the Lion Riders nod back to Keith, but a few are fighting to hide smirks. Some are better at hiding it than others.
Yeah, this is
And
only
Keith-
in the script, not in the finished
Right.
episode.
Right. And then Keith says, "What's so funny?" And then Callan shoots a warning back look at the riders, who instantly go straight-faced. Callan tries to awkwardly to explain, and Callan says, "I apologize, Keith. The Lion Riders, that is traditionally." And then Daigo says, "We're taught from childhood that only a child or a fool loses control of his own lion." So it's basically like the Lion Riders are picking on the Voltron Force for losing their lions.
That's
But
funny.
they never had that scene in there, so we never see that type of behavior towards the Voltron Force in this episode at all.
A bit disappointing, because it's nice to see like background characters being people, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, they're not just like warriors who are straight faced, basically like Keith.
Right.
They actually find stuff funny. So I'm like, no. But this is why I wanted to be on the podcast with you guys, because you have like earlier drafts of like the episodes. So I
Right.
love seeing like the cut dialogue. It's so interesting.
Well, it's even this episode, based on the script, even had a separate title before this title 5 Forged. Can you tell everybody what that title was, Greg?
It's called The Mines of Ariel.
So
Called The Mines of Ariel.
Less mystical.
yeah, I mean, it takes place a lot in the Mines of Ariel, so why not call it that? But it's also the reason that they may have called it 5 Forged is because we learned something about Voltron that has to do with 5 and how Voltron was forged.
Yeah, I like when titles have multiple levels of meaning, and I think Legendary Defender did that quite a bit. But this particular title, 5 Forged, has at least 2 layers of meaning. One being, of course, that the 5 lions were forged here, but here the team is being forged together in a stronger way than they had before. And although it's actually 8 in this case, but you know,
Yeah.
it does show that the team is bonding at perhaps a greater level than previously.
So what we do see instead of this scene is just a little scene where Vince and Daigo meet each other. Daigo says, "Hi, Vince," and Vince says, "Hey, Daigo." I mean, you can kind of gather from the way he said it that they're kind of embarrassed in how they re-met with the Lion Riders again about losing their lions.
Mhm.
But if you don't know the script, then you don't know that that's even part of it. But
Right, but
what we
I think that tone works well anyway because the cadets had never really told the pilots what they had previously done on this planet, and we see more of that in the finished episode. But yeah, there is more, a little bit more to say about the script, right?
oh yeah,
I do see that Vince's like tone with Daigo is very not dismissive, but like he's almost embarrassed to be near him again. Just and the way I see it is just because Daigo is very much being Daniel right now, where he's hero worshiping Vince, and Vince is incredibly uncomfortable with it because he doesn't even know his own powers yet. And suddenly he already has a #1 fan, knows everything about him. Like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah. And Vince, as we see in this episode, is also having a bit of imposter syndrome where he doesn't feel really like he's up to par with the rest of the team. So that's got to add to that awkwardness too.
but part of the reason also that Vince is a little bit leery around Daigo is because, as we know before, Daigo really looks up to Vince, like a fan, like he's Vince's biggest fan. So there is a section of here in the script as well where Keith leans over to look at Vince with a cocked eyebrow, like, what's that about? As Vince blushes, Larmina explains to Keith, Daigo's sort of the president of the unofficial Vince fan club. And Lance is still looking at the trying not to smirk Lion Riders. And Lance says, that's right. We're good, wholesome entertainment for the entire family. Can we get back to our lions now? So they didn't have that part at all.
So man, that's so funny.
Yep.
I know it would have taken away too much time, but also, please,
Yep.
the jokes.
Yep. So what we do get is Callan saying, your lions seem to know exactly where they were headed, but once they got this far, they simply stopped at the entrance to the temple. And the cadets look around and they recognize the location right away. Vince says, the forge. And Pidge says, you know this place, Vince? And Daniel says, yeah, me and Marmina too. We've been here before. There's some kind of hidden door on that wall and a metal shop behind that. Oh, and one of those electric-y, spirit-y Krell sheet things that attacked us and then told Vince he wasn't ready. So that was weird.
We get some backstory. Is it just me, or is there a slight continuity issue here? In Lion Rider's Return, the cadets went seemingly in the same passages initially that the pilots did, and they discovered the forge underground, and then they came out from underground at the end of the episode by riding on lions and kind of jumping out of a as I recall anyway, like a crack in the surface of the planet. So they didn't enter the forge or exit the forge through a temple. So how would they know that this specific building leads to the forge? Did I
It's a
misremember
good
something?
question.
Yeah, I don't
It's
know.
Maybe
okay.
hieroglyphics from how. Well, no, we haven't gone to the hieroglyphics yet, have we?
No, we haven't. Not yet.
In Lion Rider's Return, the glyphs that they saw were underground.
Right.
So,
So
Maybe
So
jumping the
that-
gun a little bit.
yeah, it's okay. This was also written by a different writer, right?
right. So that's all right.
Yep.
There's nothing that says they couldn't have done a little bit more reading about the planet after they left and saw a picture of the temple. Who knows?
Right. So Larmina says, why would the lions come here? And Daigo says, I assume they were waiting for you. And then suddenly the lions let loose a unified blast of their tail weapons aiming at the door, and they smash it open. Everyone ducks and covers. There's a Krelshi pack leader that bursts out, and he's on the attack. So we get to see the Voltron Force fighting the Krelshi. Now, that's another thing that we learned back in the other one, was that the Krelshi are actually on their side. You know, they're protecting Ariel, but they're not meant to harm, right? Especially if you're not there to harm them.
And another interesting thing about this episode is that I believe the Voltron Force actually makes the first move against the Krelshi. I mean, certainly the Krelshi pop out and startle the team, but the
Yeah.
Voltron Force itself actually fires the first shot or makes the first attack, which is interesting.
And to me, it would have been, I think, I would have thought that the cadets who knew what had happened with the Krelshi before would have stopped the rest of the team from, you know, attacking the Krelshi, but they didn't. They took part in it as well. So
That is interesting.
I'm like trying to remember. I did watch the episode like earlier today. The Lions attacked first, so the pilots had nothing to do with it technically. The Lions attacked first by busting down the door. Then the Krelshi.
Well,
I'm
yes,
assuming they
yeah.
were like,
yeah.
I'm
So-
assuming the Krelshi was like, "What the heck are you doing? You guys aren't supposed to be here." And you know, fighting them was like, "Hey, get away!" But obviously, being attacked, the Force isn't gonna let themselves just be attacked out of nowhere, even if the cadets would know they're friendly. But to be fair, they're like all angsty teenagers who don't know better other than fight back.
Oh, that's true. And,
Right.
and yes, I do like what you mentioned about the Lions making the first move, and maybe the pilots are just trying to, and the cadets are just trying to protect the Lions. Maybe they think the Krelshi's trying to retaliate. So yeah, good point. Good point.
But after a little bit of the fighting with the Voltron Force, the Krelshi finally gets to the sight line of the Voltron Lions and immediately halts the attack, stalks around the Lions, giving them the once-over, sniffing around the Black Lion's ruptured nexus. And then Daniel says to Vince, "Hey, you speak Krelshi, what's he doing?" And Vince says, "You want me to translate sniffing?"
I love that. There is a Star Trek original series episode. Oh gosh, it's called Metamorphosis, where the inventor of warp drive, Zephram Cochrane, he's befriended this alien that appears and manifests as this pattern of lights, and Kirk and Spock beam down, and they hold out their little handheld universal translator, and it translates the flickering lights into speech, which makes no sense. But I love the fact that in this episode, they acknowledge that that sort of thing makes no sense, and in a funny way. You know, you expect me to translate sniffing? Good stuff.
But the Krelshi turns to the wall, lets out a shriek, and then it opens a deeper passageway and illuminates some mystically glowing carvings around it. So Lance says, at some point, shouldn't this day have to stop getting weirder?
You're shaking your-
Their days are never not weird.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you're shaking your head. Yes, you're absolutely right, Angie.
Right. So Keith says, some kind of ancient writing mean anything to you? And he's talking to Alora. So Alora says, some of it, yes. Larmina, can I get a second opinion on the translation? So this is where you see the part where Larmina and Alora both have knowledge of this ancient writing. So Larmina's stepping up to decipher, and Larmina says, the path of lions, the den of, I can't make out this one. And she points to a symbol she doesn't recognize. And then the stunned look on Alora's face makes it clear that she does, however, and Alora says, creation. These mines are where Voltron was originally forged. Hunk walks up to the Black Lion and says, they knew this was here. They want Black fixed. So Lance says, back to the factory for service, huh? Smart Lions. So Laura says there's more. A warning. This path is sacred ground. Those who are worthy will pass the trials to find what they seek. And Vince says, trials. Laura says, anyone unworthy will bring disaster on the entire party. And Daniel says, how do we know who's worthy? And Keith says, we are Voltron Force. Let's assume that counts for something. And he starts moving in towards the entrance.
I think it's very clever on the writer's part that the translation of the last sentence directly plays into Vince's insecurity. I mean, they could have phrased that in any possible way, but they deliberately phrased it, anyone unworthy will bring disaster on the entire party. So if Vince has any insecurity, this would ramp it up to level 10.
Yeah. So with Keith leading the way, the Voltron Force approaches the entrance one by one. Each gets a quick sniff from the Krelshi as they go past. Daniel and Vince are at the back of the line, and Daigo approaches them and says, don't worry, Vince. If anyone is worthy to pass, it's you. But then he says to Daniel, and Daniel, even if you fail, I'm sure the punishment will be over quickly.
So Angie, what do you think of Daniel as a character in general? I know he's sort of polarizing.
I think, like, I'm gonna be honest. I think he's my favorite out of the cadets. Like, yes, I'm gonna say that he's annoying. He gets into trouble way too often, but he's also a teenage boy. He's like all teenage boys. They get into trouble. They make bad decisions. They do stuff they're obviously told not to do. But he's also the closest thing that like we fans are. Like, we're most common fans. We're not important people. We're not people with a destiny. We're like Vince and Larmina are. Like in Lion Rider's Return, where Daniel was telling Larmina about his insecurity, where like he's like, I don't have anything that makes me special. Why am I here? Are they here? Am I here to just get made fun of? And that's what I think makes him so, like, at least to me, he's kind of relatable. Where he's scared, he's acting out because he's scared. He wants that attention because he's afraid that if he doesn't get attention, he's just gonna get left behind. He's gonna be forgotten. Oops. And then Daigo is also really annoying to me, especially in this episode, because he's just beating Daniel down. Like, oh my gosh, you like, kid, you need to stop. He's like, well, it'll be fine. You'll do like, or like, well, he's not even like trying to be reassuring. He was like, oh, maybe it'll be like quick. You don't say that to somebody. Like, he could have just stopped and been like praising Vince and that's it. But he decided to go that step further and like make Daniel feel bad about himself, because he does have insecurities the same, like maybe not the same way, but in an extremely similar way to Vince. And I'm not sure if you guys have gotten the Dark Blue yet, but Vince saw that, and Vince is like taking ideas from Daniel, because even though like maybe he's not his hero, but he's like his best friend, period. They're best friends. They're both so similar, and they're learning from each other. Daniel's learning from Vince how to become like a more mellowed out person, but Vince is learning from Daniel to not be so anxious. Like in this episode specifically, he's, like you said, Greg, he was so anxious and scared, and like his imposter syndrome all the way up. So like, it took literally most of the episode for Vince to get over it and to finally do something basically the same way Daniel would, racing head first, just blindly trying to follow the team to be with them. And like, it worked. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. I really like Daniel. I found him almost intolerable the first time I watched the show, but in subsequent viewings, he is one of my favorites too. And I think in large part because I think you phrase it very eloquently. He is the viewpoint character. He's the proxy for the viewer, for the fan, and this really is his season. He's the one who kind of boxes the season in. At the very beginning, we see him, bored in school and saying, of course, if this weren't all about to change, I wouldn't be telling you all this. He is the viewpoint character in an ensemble show, in as much as he can be in an ensemble show. And then, of course, at the end of the season, we won't go into details. It's kind of the other end of that narration that he has in the very first episode. So we sort of follow Daniel's very personal journey, and again, as in as much as we can in a show with an ensemble cast. So yeah, he's a great character.
At that point, Daniel says, "Come on, Vince, let's." And as Vince approaches, the Krelshi slams down a paw, blocking his path. And Vince says, "What did I?" And the Krelshi growls at him. And Daniel says, "What did it say?" "Same thing as last time. You're not ready." And Daniel says, "What? That's crazy." So Lance says, "Hey, Shock Paws, he's with the team." So the rest of the force looks ready to back Lance up, but Vince says quietly, crushed, "No." And Daniel says, "Vince." And Vince says, "How much time does the Black Lion have, Pidge?" Pidge says, "I'm not sure. Could be days, could be hours." And Vince says, "And I'm not going to be the one who stops us from saving it." Lance says, "You're sure about this?" And Vince nods and says, "Go."
Ron Bell Jr.'s delivery of that one word is so effective.
Yeah.
It shows he knows that it's the right thing to do in the moment, but you can tell how sad he is that this creature is again confirming in his perception his own imposter syndrome, which is it's very sad. I feel for the guy.
Yeah, so Vince stays behind with Daigo and the rest of them go in. So now they're in the Ariel and mines, and they're in a passage, and the force moves down into the deeper bowels of the mine, looking around cautiously. And Keith says, "Anything in particular we should be watching out for here, Allura?" And Allura says, "I wish I knew. All I got was trials." And Larmina says, "What is it with mysterious ancient writing? It's all ominous warnings, zero specifics." The force emerges from an opening into a larger chamber in which every surface is shiny and metallic, grooved with intricate circuitry connected at movable junctions. Everyone gives it a quick look over, and Daniel says, "Huh, science junk. Does this mean we're already at the Voltron Fix-It shop?" Lance says, "And our big trial was the stroll down here? I'm kind of doubting it." The entrance that they came through slams shut. There's multiple pulses of electrical energy starting zipping along the grooves on the floor, the walls, and the ceilings. And Hunk and Lance say, "Huh? Hey, the pulses are moving fast and haphazardly." And as they cross over the feet of the Voltron Force, they give them a nasty shock on impact. So everybody starts getting these little shocks, and Keith says, "Back into the mine shaft, force the door." And they each try to use their weapons from their Voltcoms, and it's sealed tight. They can't get through. Larmina says, "This is supposed to be a test, not a trap. There has to be a way out." And then Pidge says, "It's an oversized circuit board, but the connections are misaligned. It's a tech puzzle." And Keith says, "Great, then tech us out of here." And Pidge says, "I just need to figure out the alignment." And all of a sudden, "Wait, I know this pattern. I can fix this. This is," and then all of a sudden, Pidge saw a few pulses converging on his position, but he's hit by multiple charges at once and he gets knocked out.
He's my favorite character ever. Knocked out too early.
And all we see are the stunned faces of the rest of the Voltron Force at the end of Act 1.
Yeah. So one of the things that we touch on from time to time is when we notice some oddities in animation that maybe they could have communicated things a little better with a little more time or money. And one thing that stood out to me in this scene is that the density of the pathways on the floor is not so high. There are plenty of spaces where they could have stood to never get shocked. And this is not the fault of the writing at all. I think this was genuinely a budget issue where if they had had a more dense field of these things with a lot more activity, I think that it would have been a little bit more convincing. And I'm not cutting on anybody. I think this was just a practicality issue. But I do think that's something that I kind of wish that they had a little bit more cash to put a little bit more into that background. I think it's a great scene, a great setup. It's just that I keep looking at it going, just stand over there,
So we do know that this is the first trial. So you kind of get the feeling that they're going to be able to get past this somehow. But boy, do they get hurt along the way,
Oh,
right?
goodness. Yeah.
So as we come into Act 2, Pidge is still collapsed on the floor. Hunk says, Pidge. Keith says, I've got him. He does a dive roll action in order to get to Pidge. And then he's holding on to Pidge. And Lance says, you see the puzzle Pidge was talking about? And Hunk says, I'm trying to, but I got nothing. And then Lance says, then I guess you two are up. And he's talking to Daniel and Larmina. And then Larmina says, Lance, I don't. And Lance says, you've been studying under Pidge for months. That's the closest thing we've got to an expert right now. Or did you think these trials didn't apply to cadets?
So I do want to point out, just for lore purposes, that this is the only indication of how long the cadets have actually been with the team. I think this is the only time we hear any kind of a reference. So they've been around for months. So there we go.
Right.
And it's not much, but it's something.
So Daniel says, while he's dodging around, this is crazy. What are we even looking for? And Larmina says, Pidge said it's a circuit board, but the pulses are jumping all over the place, off circuit. The puzzle's in the connectors. Can you see any way to line up? So Larmina trails off as her eyes dart around. And Daniel says, you know what? I actually can. So apparently he can see where they line up. So Daniel and Larmina dive into action, striking and moving several of the adjustable junctions in the grooves in isolated shots. And as they finish up, we see that they turned the haywire circuit board into a harmonious circuit. The pulses have become confined to specific tracks, leaving a path open to the opposite side of the chamber, and a new exit door slides open.
I do like how they use color to indicate that all was right with the world. When everything was misaligned, the light was red. And when all the little connectors were flipped around, the light became that Voltron energy color blue, which was really nice.
Yep.
I'm really glad that, half glad, half not that they did this with the team, because it's always a thing where Pidge is the one saving their butts. In Legendary Defender, it's Pidge who's doing all the work. And even earlier in this TV show, it's Pidge doing all the work. And then Defender of the Universe, Voltron the Third Dimension, it's Pidge doing the heavy lifting basically to get them through it. I'm really glad that this show noticed that and is like, no, we're gonna nerf him really hard.
Yeah.
And just took him out entirely.
Yeah.
Plus, I know, well, maybe not know, but I always assumed that fans thought the cadets were useless, or specifically talking about Daniel here. Daniel didn't really do anything other than just maybe he thought of a solution for Flashform Go, where he's like, hey, I have an idea. This let's plug myself in so we can get a speed boost, right? It's really cool to see that he's not just riffing off of himself. He's actually learning from people, even if he doesn't really show them respect, which makes me a little bit sad. But
yeah, I agree. It's nice that in this show, I agree with you. Pidge is usually doing the intellectual heavy lifting, but Vince is the second in the pecking order, I guess you could say. He usually follows up if Pidge doesn't know something, or vice versa. But it is nice that Daniel is the one that figures this out. It could have just as easily been Vince had he been around. It could have been Larmina, because she has studied so many things. She's more inclined to pay attention. But no, it's Daniel, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and Larmina says to Daniel, "Whoa, who knew you actually listened in class?" Even Daniel himself says, "Yeah, I had no idea." At least he's honest, right? And then Keith says, "Nice work. Let's hope that was the hard test." And then they move through the exit door. And then we go back to the cliff face and the forge entrance where we close in on the black lion, still standing next to the other lions. But we take a look inside Black's chest to the ruptured nexus, and we just hear the tiniest of creaking, and we see the nexus rupture widening. And a bit of
that's how the script describes it.
a bit of the purple Hegarium started leaking in.
Well, here's the thing. Yes, yeah, it's like that in the show. In the script, it talks about the actual rupture and the nexus getting bigger and energy leaking out. But in the script or in the finished episode, the purple stuff on the nexus is basically spreading. I think it was just another one of those things that was a little easier to animate. So and it gets the point across too. So
But nearby, Vince is watching the entrance, and the Krelshi is still standing guard. Daigo is next to him, and Vince says, "This is just stupid. I'm supposed to be a part of the Voltron Force, but I'm totally useless up here. What can I even do?" And then Daigo says, "You heard the warning, Vince. I know you're worthy, but if you're not ready for the trials down there..." And Vince says, "According to whom? The Krelshi? Who decided that some kind of electric spirit line would be a good judge of character?"
They're electric spirit lines. I don't know what he expects.
I think they know better than him right now.
yeah.
And Daigo is a little bit spooked by what he says, and he says, "I think he heard you." So we go back to the mines, and now they're passing into another shaft and another larger chamber. Hunk is carrying Pidge, and as they enter, their eyes fixate and widen on what's making this noise. And then Lance says, "I'm going to say this is the hard test." And then we get to see a picture of what it is. It looks like they're going through a gauntlet of giant swinging blacksmith tools, like hammers, chisels, bending wrenches. They're moving very fast, let's just say.
Yeah, I do admit that when I first saw this episode back in the day, I did not make any connection at this point with smithing at all. I just thought, oh, death trap.
Right. Of course, yeah. You didn't take a notice to what kind of tools they were or anything. You just thought, well, this is dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, Lance says this is the hard test, but as soon as Larmina and Daniel see this, boy, they just see it as a contest. And Daniel says, "I'll race you." He bolts into it, and then Larmina just keeps on going after him. They use their Voltcom tools at various stages along it, but they get through. And then the rest of the Voltron Force follow. And Laura goes in, she uses her whip to get through it. And then Keith and Lance and Hunk's still holding Pidge. And then at some point along the way, there's a hammer that strikes and kicks up sparks, and one of them lands on Pidge's leg, and that sort of brings him back to consciousness. And he looks around wondering what's going on, and Hunk says, "Just hold on, Pidge, we're almost out." But the whole Voltron Force clears that one pretty easily, I think, compared to the previous one. What do you think?
Way too easy, to be honest, for like how fast everything was moving. Like maybe okay, like Larmina, since she's trained in so many like fighting styles, okay, I can see her getting through it, like just seeing the battlefield and going, all right, I know where to go from here. Daniel's a little like on and off, but I'm like, okay, maybe it's just with like, since he's a good pilot, right? He's made to dodge stuff really easily, or like if he needs to fire on something, his reaction time is really good. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. But with like Hunk carrying Pidge over his shoulder, Lance, I noticed, was like right beside him. So those two were distracted with keeping Pidge safe. I think Keith was alone, but either way, he was like near the back with Pidge, Hunk, and Lance. So I'm like, maybe they should have had a little bit of a tougher time, but yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, they got through that one a lot quicker.
Yeah, I think this one, and spoilers, the next one, we get through those pretty quickly. And I think it's just a matter of timing. They were doing 5 tests representing the 5 whatevers that I don't want to mention because they're spoilery. It's spoilery, but they had 5 things to go through, and we're already halfway into the episode. I think it's just a matter of time. But yeah, I do think it does feel way too easy for them to get through this. It's
Right.
like Star Wars Attack of the Clones when Padme is in that factory on Geonosis. Is it Geonosis? No, whatever that planet is, and all those
Yeah,
crazy smashing. Yeah, on Geonosis, all those
yeah,
weird battle droid assembling machines and all these
yeah,
crazy smashers and things are. And she's just sort of staggering around like she's not even aware of what's going on, but nothing hits her.
right.
Kind of like that. Oh well.
Yep. So they come into another chamber, and this looks like it's trial chamber number 3. And it has several spinning 8-foot towers with multiple openings in them. And they are firing a strange looking energy that scorches everything it hits. Lance says, "Oh, you have got to be." But then an energy blast nearly takes off his head, so he has to duck. Pidge slides down from Hunk's shoulders as the team runs, and he starts throwing his Voltcom smart stars at one of the towers, and he's knocking out the firing mechanisms. So with that tower down, the team is able to avoid the fire for the rest as they head out the exit. So again, they got through that very fast, and just they were dodging things that were firing at them.
I do think those cubes look really, really cool. That's all.
I think Pidge should have been down just a little bit longer, just because if it's fine that they can all like handle maybe being shocked by like one of the things or one of those lines from the first room. He got shocked by all 3 of them at the same time.
Right.
And we already see that the shocks, like even if it's just one, they like not paralyze them, but they keep them stunned just for like a second. So all 3 of them, like those 3 all together on the smallest pilot, like he's got to be down for a little bit longer, maybe past like that room specifically, or once we get to the next room, like he should have been, I think, like loopier, like, oh, make it harder for them to like rely on Pidge, because they do rely on him again in the next one before they finally figured out what the challenge was.
Right. Lance says, "Seriously, who just decides to build a giant theme room death trap?" And Pidge says, "Actually, I think I may know. Those circuit patterns in the first chamber, I told you I knew them. That style is unique to Balto." And Daniel says, "Your home planet?" Alora says, "You think your people built this path of lions?" And Pidge shakes his head. "No, I mean, yes, but not just them. We know my planet provided the technology for the original Voltron, and we know the raw metal was mined from here on Ariel, hence the chamber with the nasty blacksmith theme." So Pidge turns to Hunk, pointing back towards the door of the chamber they just exited, and Pidge says, "Hunk, I'm sure will recognize the unusual energy those towers were firing at us in the last chamber." And Hunk says, "He's right. That's the same stuff powering Voltron. That comes from Ariel too?" And Pidge says, "I don't think so. It seems to me that these trials and Voltron itself were designed by a collaboration of planets, each bringing its own native strength to our favorite giant robot." So the team lets that sink in, and then Keith realizes, so how many collaborating planets are we expecting trials from? And Pidge says, "At least 4, because at that moment, a bunch of faceless humanoid robots enter the chamber." So this is all stuff that we've never heard before, by the way, but
Oh yeah.
we've been seeing, little things along the way, like when we first met the Lion Riders on Ariel, when we went to Balto to see all of the tech ninja scientists.
Right.
And we learned a little bit that Mayhawks knew a little bit more about Voltron than the rest of the Voltron Force did.
Yep, this is good stuff. I will say that when Legendary Defender came out and we saw the Paladins training in the Castle of Lions and that Altean training robot came at them. I don't know if you remember that or not, that humanoid looking training robot. This is the episode that came to mind. I was thinking of these robots in this episode because they're these faceless humanoid things coming after our heroes. So that was kind of fun. I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but it was cool.
So Larmina says, how is this fair? I thought we already had a tech trial. And Keith says, enough of this, blast the bots and let's move on. But all of a sudden they realize that their Voltcoms don't work. And Daniel says, what? Hey, come on, let's go with the boom boom. And Lance says, Pidge, I'm drawing blanks here. Pidge says, it's a jamming signal. They're blocking our Voltcoms. So it looks like they're in danger now again.
Yeah, and there's a line in the finished episode that is not in the script, a line from Keith where he says, the Voltcoms are dead. So it adds a little more clarity. It's not just, oh, there's some kind of a signal. So a kid might not pick up on what that means. So it's nice that they added that line that just flat out says, we can't use these things.
Mm-hmm. So we go back up to the surface where we see Daigo and Vince again. And Daigo says, maybe you're being held in reserve, for an even more special role. And Vince says, Daigo, I'm sitting on a rock while the Black Lion bleeds out energy. So Vince looks over at the Black Lion and we see another angle, and it looks like that rupture is widening even more because it starts filling with that purple Hegarium, right?
Yeah, it's spreading more. Yep. And the lion kind of shudders or staggers or something.
Right. And Vince says, if there's something special about this, I'm not seeing what. And then suddenly his eyes go wide and it glosses over his eyes. And he starts hearing faint voices in his head. And Daigo says, Vince, what's wrong? And Vince says, did you hear that? And Daigo says, hear what? What is it? And Vince goes, shh. And he says, it's the Voltron Force. Something's gone wrong. So it's like he can hear their voices in the chamber.
I like that he's got these unique abilities. And it's sad to me that he still doubts himself when this is a gift that is unique to him. I mean, he's got so much going for him. And he'll learn, but he isn't quite there yet.
It's scary though, I will agree. Yeah. It's a gift, sure, but from what we see in the first episode and we never see it again, we see that lion blue jewel thing and that he puts it in his Volcon, we just never see it again. And then I think he sees King Alfor's ghost, so a dead guy gave him his powers. It's pretty freaky.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do want to point out when his eyes gloss over. I'm not sure if it's they just forgot or something, but they do the crackling sound effects, but they never do the crackling for his eyes, so it just kind of looks like his eyes went blind for a minute and then just heard all the noises before he comes back and it's what happened.
Yeah, they might have forgotten that animated effect there. But yeah, I just think I love that he's got so much going for him.
All right, so we go back into the chamber where the faceless robots are. And Keith says, we're losing the line, Pidge. And Pidge says, I can't find an override frequency. They've got us completely locked out of our own Voltcoms. Lance says, forget the Voltcoms. It's the human element of Voltron that's being tested here because he's able to see a reflection of himself in the face of one of those faceless robots. So Keith says, good old-fashioned fist fight? And Lance says, oh, you always know the right thing to say to me.
I am gonna put my opinion again. I'm a little annoyed by the fact that they chose the word humanity just because what? technically 4 or like total 5 are aliens. So we have Vince, who's definitely not all the way human. Larmina's not human. Pidge, Allura. I think later in the show we find out that Keith isn't entirely human. So it's like 5 out of the 8 who aren't human, and yet they still chose the word humanity. And I know it's just to make it easier to pass it, but I'm like, can we just use determination, the power of will? You know, like it's the heart of Voltron to like keep striving to go. But yeah,
Right.
whatever.
I thank you for putting that out there. I was about to say
Yeah.
something along those lines. Like, what is humanity? What is this human element, and what is it actually bringing to Voltron? It's so vague. It's represented by punching and kicking. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but when you're talking about people from other planets and everything, do we call them human beings? We don't. Oh, we only call ourselves here on Earth human beings, right?
Well, we're the only ones that we know of in the real world, of course.
So, I mean, even in the Marvel movies, the other races were calling us humans. You know,
Yeah,
like
but
with Thanos and the Kree and all that, they were all calling us humans.
I was just going to say that it really depends on which show you're talking about. Like Star Trek has so many human-looking aliens. You know, the Cardassians with the glop on their forehead, the Vulcans with the ears, but many other planets where they look the inhabitants look just like humans. And there's a whole backstory that suggests that many of these humanoid species had been seeded on various planets in the ancient past by this alien race called the Preservers. It's only mentioned in a couple episodes, but still there is a distinction between humans of Earth and other beings. So in this context, it is weird and kind of ambiguous. Yeah, it is kind of strange. What were you about to say?
I was gonna add like basically the same thing, where it's like even if we call ourselves humans, other races would still call us humans, right? Um, like you know how people call it in the show, like what episode 3 when Lotor comes by, he's like, oh, the Erusians are fighting the humans. Like even though he's technically wrong, like he's right. Yeah, it's the Erusian force fighting against human forces. So it's that way basically, where you just maybe they look super humanoid, like how Pidge and Allura look way too similar to humans, in to my taste. But like they could maybe not could be called humans, but like they could be mistaken for humans, but they're still like Allura's still Erusian, Pidge is still Balkan.
Right. So in a series of quick shots, we see robot heads popping off robot bodies, robots flying backward. 2 robots are slammed into each other because they all just decided to use hand-to-hand combat to beat these robots. Of course, if my Voltcom didn't work, that's automatically what I would go to.
Well, see, that's the thing. They do that before they learn about humanity being the secret ingredient.
Yeah.
They're doing it and they're getting their butts handed to them. And then, oh, it's humanity. Oh, well, then we'll fight harder. I don't know, but they win this time.
They could have like made it obvious that they were being on the defensive. They would have been like, they could have said like, oh, something like, hey, hurtle around, like go around Pidge, make sure he has his time to do this. So it's obvious that they're not fighting hard, but they're still fighting back. And then when Lance figures out, oh, it's a test of our will, it's a test of our humanity, they're like, oh, okay, go all out. That's all you had to say.
Agreed.
Okay. They finish that room, and Daniel says, well, I, for one, can't wait to see what's behind the next door of fun. So they enter into this 5th room, and it's like a techno-mystic workshop with various art symbols. There's a theme of 5 united planets and a few images of Voltron. Larmina says, what is this place? And Hunk's looking at some of the unusual tools that are on the walls, and he says, it looks like some kind of workshop, but I don't recognize half those tools. And Allura says, I think we're here. And she walks up to one of the 5 planets art pieces, and Keith says, careful, Allura. Alora says, look at the artwork. The theme is consistent. A union of 5 planets, the creation of Voltron. You can feel it in the walls. This is the workshop where it all began. So Pidge approaches a similar piece on another wall, and he points to the planets as he IDs them, and he says, Balto, Ariel, looks like Earth for the humanity aspect. This one I don't know, but it's obviously the source of Voltron's energy. That's still only 4 trials for 5 planets, Alora. Alora smiles, pointing to the 5th planet, and she says, yes, but you know the 5th as well as I do, Pidge. She says to the whole group, it's Eris. We bring unity to Voltron. If I know my home, this should be a place of harmony, not of violent testing.
So I have to ask again, just as we sort of, questioned the whole concept of the human element in the previous chamber, what makes Eris more united than any of the other planets? I don't understand. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I kind of think that like what was the original legend where Voltron got broken up into lions and did they land on Eris specifically? Right?
Yes.
So my idea is that whatever ruler, whoever found Voltron, they were the ones working on it before Alfor, or like, and then bringing from VLD here, how like Alfor was like, hey, let's just make these into like images for peace, right? And he brings a whole collaboration of people. Like Alfor is, or from what I'm thinking, Alfor is the reason why any of the planets got to work on Voltron. Why he's probably the person who reached out to Balto, Ariel, the energy planet, and like maybe he didn't give them a home, but like he gave them an equal footing. And the lions, especially 5 planets, 5 lions, they each had a lion to call their own, almost, where like their heritage could be traced back, and which I think is really funny with like Green being connected to Balto, and oh my gosh, whoa, look, it's Pidge. I'm not sure if Blue is connected to Eris, but Blue is a big motif for Eris, so I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Well, don't forget they're talking about the elements of, you're talking about water and fire or magma, you're talking about wind, you're talking about earth or the sand, you're talking about what is black represented?
It depends on the
by?
show.
Lightning,
Yeah.
lightning, space, whatever.
Right. So if you bring all these elemental things into it, maybe Aris was the place that had all those elements. And it was the first time that Voltron was ever united together with the 5 lines becoming the giant robot.
Maybe.
So when you talk about the unifying, aspect of Aris, that's the place where it all happened. Whereas the lines may have been forged on Ariel, but they never came together as Voltron there first. They came together as Voltron through the help of Aris with all the elements.
You two have good
Does that make
ideas.
sense?
Yeah, good theories. I like them.
Okay. All right. So Alora says, for the sake of the Black Lion, could we just trust my people? So she ends up seeing that there's these cable tethered devices that are standing up in the center of the room. And she puts her palm down onto the device in front of her, and all the teammates do the same thing. And the devices are instantly locking down on their arms.
Ouch.
Around their hand and wrist, right?
Yeah. They're like hand-sized bear traps.
So all of them are going, what the, as this happens, and all of a sudden a bunch of Krelshis slide down from the walls, and Lance turns to Laura and says, I hate to be the one who tells you this, but I think your people have a nasty streak. So the Krelshi are pouncing to attack as we end Act 2.
Yep. We're in the home stretch.
Yes. So we come into Act 3. Now we're back to the fight in progress, and Pidge says, just hang on. 5 planets, 5 trials. This has to be the last one. And Alora says, but the Krelshi aren't even from Eris. This test makes no sense. And Hunk says, maybe we already failed, and this is just the punishment. So one of the Krelshi lunges at Larmina. She bolts forward, then reaching. What happens is, as they pull their hands away, there's like a tether to the unit that's holding it down.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lanyard with a badge you might swipe at the office.
Right. So they're able to do some things like kick and punch and all this other stuff to try to block the Krelshi. And at one point, Daniel gets knocked backwards. That puts Lance off of his feet, and they both fall on their backs. They're screaming as they're getting hit by the Krelshi. And of course, this carries over back to Vince, because Vince can still hear their yells. And Daigo says, what is it? What's happening? And Vince says, they need me. And Daigo says, okay, but how do we... Suddenly, the black lion falls forward onto its side. And Daigo looks over at the black lion, and Daigo says, Vince. But Vince has taken off. He's running toward the Path of Lion's entrance.
When the black lion collapses, I realize that thing is made of metal. I realize it's scary, powerful. I realize that it is enormous. When it falls, I kind of feel sorry for the poor thing, as if it were a little kitty or something.
Over from his toes.
Yeah. Poor thing. Just want to give it a hug, but it's too big.
Yeah, he looks so sad when he falls down. Like he can't keep standing anymore. Like, no, the poor kitty.
Yeah, but you don't see any of the other lions go by its side and try to help it or anything like that, right?
No.
It's all in your head, Black. Don't worry about it. You can get up.
So Vince is he's racing towards the mines. He jumps over the Krelshi, and he's able to avoid getting hit by it. He keeps on running, and here's the thing. I've never seen Vince so athletic. Okay, really? You don't think of him as being this athletic type, but boy, he starts running through chamber after chamber after chamber, and he gets through these way faster than any of the rest of them did.
Yes.
It's amazing.
I love how he's in the 3rd chamber with all the lasers, and he has that big yell and releases his lion energy, and it goes all, you don't really see this transition here, but the energy blast goes all the way into the next chamber and blows the robot up. I just love that. So as far as how he gets through this so easily, I almost wonder if, this is what the Smith or the Krelshi had really been setting up. Isn't it? We could think of this as it was made thousands of years ago or whatever, and here are the trials. But in this specific case, it seems like, this is Vince's moment, and the Krelshi know it.
Yeah.
And it, if I would argue that they're probably letting him in a little bit more easily, because the trial is what's in that last chamber. It's what he does in the last chamber. It's really not the chambers leading up to it. What are your thoughts?
I did notice that it was like, this is just a cartoon thing where they give their characters who maybe aren't superhuman, like more superhuman tendencies. Vince front flips over a Krelshi who was way bigger than him. So I have a feeling that the Krelshi did just maybe lean over to the side and so all right, cool, I know what you're doing. Quit showing off, just go. But yeah, I'm agreeing with you. This is all Vince's stuff, because he's going at this alone, and then his only driving force is, I need to be there right now. And like Mark was saying, he's never been so athletic before, but he's been training with the Force for months. And this is just the culmination of everything, where he could do it. He really can. he just needed that push, and he got that push.
Right. So he is more self-assured than he ever has been at this moment. Okay.
And what did it take for him to do that? It took him to look outside himself. Sometimes we are at our lowest points when we can think only of how badly we feel about ourselves, and sometimes turning outward is the greatest thing that a person can do to rise up to any challenge. And I think it's very well dramatized here.
Yeah. But that Krelshi keeps on chasing him through all of those chambers into the final one. And when he gets there, there's another pedestal that opens up in the middle of the floor. And he rushes over to it, and Pitch says, "Vince, what?" And then Keith says, "No," but Vince ignores it, and he gets to the pedestal and he puts his palm down on it, and it instantly clamps down on his arm. And Daniel says, "Are you insane? What are you doing?" And Vince says, I don't know. But what happens then is all the Krelshi that were in that room and the other Krelshi that chased him, they all combine together and start twirling around in a ball above them. So the Voltron Force don't know what's going to come out of this, but what it ends up being is there's this energy flash, and then it takes a surprisingly human form, and it becomes the blacksmith.
So do you either of you remember what you thought when this happened the first time you watched the episode? I don't either. But watching it again now, it's such a neat thing that something visually that looks so mundane can emerge from something that fantastic. These five uh mythical looking creatures coalescing into a person. I just think that's so cool. Something straight out of Star Trek or something.
When I finished watching this episode like earlier today, I did like how after the blacksmith formed, the first thing he said was like he put his hand like reassuringly on Vince's shoulder and is like, "Now you're ready." And it's nice to see that because yes, he does look up to Pidge, but the blacksmith very honestly, like to me at least, he has a more like fatherly kind of vibe, the same way Alfor does, basically.
Yeah.
Where he is a reassuring presence, and not to mention he's like more important than all of the team combined. So not only is this really big person, this really reassuring person who has been with Vince basically the entire time he's been realizing how important he was, or less, at least in like the big sections. For him to be followed like that and then reassured that he did the right thing, I feel definitely solidified Vince. Like, okay, I can do this. This is what I'm meant to do.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
So Laura says, "A fifth trial, one that was pure Aris after all." And she says to the blacksmith, "A test of unity." And the blacksmith nods, and he says, the fundamental essence of Voltron. And to Vince, he says, "And one I'm pleased to see young cadet Vince values more than his own self-doubt. Well done." So like you said, Greg.
What if this is why? So if this show can be thought of as a follow-on to the 80s show, one of the great and there's a pretty good argument that in the broad strokes it can be. One of the big questions about the original show is why didn't they form Voltron when Zarkon attacked Eris way back when? I mean, the Lion Keys were buried with Alfor. It wasn't until years later that the space explorers arrived and activated the Lions and formed Voltron. And I just, if this show is indeed a spiritual sequel to the original show, what if the problem was that in the devastation of Zarkon attacking Eris so fast, there was no Voltron Force at that point? Either they weren't there and hadn't formed yet, there was no earlier generation, or they'd been wiped out early on in the attack. And it took that unity that could only come from a cohesive team to reactivate the robot. It's more than the keys. what if that unity of those 5 space explorers is what activated the Lions? And it happened on Eris. So I wonder if that had some part in it. Don't know.
Do want to like add, I do think the same way as you do, where like maybe it was so early that they finished Voltron and then all of a sudden Zarkon attacked. Like whether or not Zarkon was like, you know how in Legendary Defender he got corrupted and that's why he turned on the team. Maybe like whether or not that happened for Defender of the Universe. Do you remember the Comet episode where all the pilots died in Defender of the Universe? Like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think that moment specifically, when they all choose to keep fighting, to keep being together instead of going to basically heaven, is when they finally solidified unity. Like I have this idea in my head where the pilots and the cadets can all switch alliance because they have the keys, but it's the keys that's testing the cadets. It's the keys that's testing if they're worthy to even fly the Lions in the first place. While the pilots have already proven by losing their life and coming back that they're willing to do it all over again just to make sure everything's neat and tidy, everything's like united basically.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I
Yeah.
one of the things that I love about Voltron lore is that there are so many gaps, and in the lore that there's so much material to fill in with your imagination.
Right. At the end here now, Pidge, of course, when he
Pidge,
sees the
yeah.
blacksmith, okay, he says, "You're the blacksmith, the one who forged Voltron." And the blacksmith says, "I had my part, yes." And Pidge says, "I have so many questions." But the blacksmith says, "I'm certain you do, but I'm afraid I have a very limited role and not much time to do it in. I understand your Black Lion has a nexus problem." So here's where Pidge thinks, "Oh, I've got this great opportunity. I want to learn it all. Please teach me, And he can't because we gotta save Black Lion first.
I love how Daigo is Vince's biggest fan and Pidge is the Smith's biggest fan.
Honestly, like me too. The second he popped up, I'm like, oh, please tell me like more about Voltron, please. Like it's vague on purpose. I need like a breadcrumb. Come on. But he's
Yeah.
like, no, we've got work to do. You need you need this to save the universe. And I'm like, the universe can wait, please.
Yeah, I love that about Doctor Who as well, where the main character is so mysterious, and on those very rare occasions you get any morsel of information about the Doctor. I always find myself wanting to hear just more, and it doesn't happen.
So we end up going back on the surface where Black Lion is. And the Smith is looking at the rupture in the Nexus and then steps back, gets ready to work. So everybody's observing while he says, "You may want to keep a safe distance." And then he grabs one of his instruments and there's this flash, and in a series of rapid images, we see the Smith is taking things to the Nexus with different instruments. And you see, like in the first image, there's blue and water is washing over the frame, right? You saw that, right?
Yes.
Did it appear like it was water to you? I mean, I just want to remember when you first saw it.
No, I didn't. So the script explicitly states things that I don't think are very obvious at all in the visuals, and I really wish they had clarified this. But the script says in a series of, yeah, okay. So the Smith jabs an instrument into the Black Lion's nexus. There's a black flash as lightning. That's the Black Lion's element in some of the shows, arcs down onto the instrument, functioning as a kind of lightning rod. In a series of rapid images, we see the other 4 Voltron elements applied by the Smith. with an appropriate color flash. Blue, water washes over the frame. Green, wind blows through. Red, magma pours down from above. Yellow, sand wipes across as if blown in a sandstorm. This is not at all obvious to me in the visuals. And that's kind of a bummer.
But
I really wish that they had made that more obvious.
yeah, so again, the elements come into play.
For like one of them, I'm like trying to remember. I did remember like this little weird ball thing that reminded me of air. Like period. That was very air to me, like Avatar: The Last Airbender kind of style.
Mm-hmm.
But the water, not so much. Like I think I remember like a wave crashing down, but it also the way it was colored just looked just like air. I was like, maybe this
Yeah.
is just air whooshing or something, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
With a show that has so many ties to Voltron lore, it would have been really nice if they'd made this much more obvious. But it's
Right.
still a good sequence.
After he's done with all that, what we see is they're on the plains of Ariel, and Keith is back in the controls of the Black Lion. And Keith says, "Oh yeah, that feels good." And then outside, the Smith, Daigo, and the Lion Riders are watching Keith limber up the Black Lion, and the rest of the Voltron Force is in the other 4 lions. And the Smith says, "Well, I do have a bit of experience in the trade." And Keith says, "We can never thank you enough for this. For all of this, the entire universe owes you a tremendous..." And then Daigo leans into the view and he says, "Please just do it."
This is what I meant when Daigo like is kind of annoying to me because like I get it, fan of Voltron, I am too, but the lore, like
Right.
what would the blacksmith would have said? Like, would he have dropped something? Like, would he have not name dropped or anything, but like would he have like a vague hand motion to like, oh, like it couldn't have been possible without this or like that stuff? But no, Daigo just had to be like, please do it. Please form Voltron, kid. You've
Well,
already seen it.
I kind of get the idea that Daigo jumping in where the blacksmith would have said, "Well, there is one final test we have to do to see how well Black is performing," and that's to bring Voltron together.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think
I was thinking maybe there's one last test and then we never find out what it is. I just remembered a nerdy remark that I made during the Lion Riders return review. I believe strongly that Daigo is an Easter egg, the name Daigo, because the first syllable Dai is from Die Rugger and Go is from Go Lion. I think might be coincidental, but it seems really, really similar. Oh well, enough of that.
Yep. Okay. Talon says Daigo, and Lance says, "You heard the kid, Keith." So Keith smiles and he says, "Ready to form Voltron, activate interlocks, dinotherms connected, infracells up, mega thrusters are go." And then they all, in the split screen say, "Let's go Voltron Force." Keith says, "Form feet and legs, form arms and body, and I'll form the head." The transformation sequence ends and Voltron rises up on the aerial planes, looking as good as new, like you see behind Greg there.
Yes, there he is.
And Daigo says, "I'm a big fan of your work." And the Smith smiles. And then with another energy flash, the Smith separates back into the several Krelshi.
5.
And they,
Yep.
yeah, 5 Krelshi, and they run wild on the plains of Ariel as Voltron gleams in the sunlight. And Keith says, "Now we're ready for anything."
And so that line is not in the script that we have. Keith's last line, literally the last line occurs right after Daigo says, "I'm a big fan of your work." The Smith actually looks up at Voltron and says, "I am too," and then disappears. And that's the end from the script. I like Keith's line a lot.
Yeah.
I'm gonna disagree with you there. I really like the fact that the blacksmith is like he was so happy to work on Voltron, something as big as Voltron. He's like, "I'm a big fan of my stuff too," before he like, disappears into the crush, and I'm like, man, like Keith, I love you, but
I could see that.
Hmm. Yeah. So what did you think of the episode?
honestly, lore packed. I think you got like the fact when you guys emailed me back for this episode specifically, I got so excited because I knew we'd be talking about lore, and like Greg said, I'm a lore junkie. I love learning about the world of Voltron specifically. So hearing that we have like confirmation, we did get confirmation before, but this is like solid. Like we now know that there is one mystery planet that they need to find. This is their mission for the rest of the series. Um, so I'm like, man, this is a solid episode. This is one that like definitely kept me watching. There's some where maybe I wasn't interested in, like Drayden, baby Drayden. Like, love the episode. I love that that episode is just not them fighting any big bad, right? Like no giant robots or anything. It's just them trying to relax and their vacation getting ruined. Like that kind of bored me a little bit, but we do. It's nice to see. And this episode, like I said, lore packed, really interesting to see everyone's strength play into it, and then especially because this is when Vince is finally like putting his foot down. It's like, all right, I can't be scared anymore. I have to keep going.
Yep. He
Right.
comes into his own, and he really is his own antagonist. It's man versus self, and he overcomes that, and you know, the team comes out ahead as a result. And I love that, you know, Vince is the character who unlocks many of Voltron's new powers, helps to give him a bit more power when he needs it, and all that good stuff. And once again, Vince indirectly restores Voltron through his selfless act here. And you know, he joins the team, he overcomes his self-doubt, and once again helps to restore Voltron. And he really bolsters his already great reputation for saving the day. So
Yeah.
yeah.
As far as that energy planet goes, we would have loved to have had a second season of this show so that we could have gone into that more.
Yeah.
And we would have found out a lot more about Vince as well and how he was tied to that energy planet because they both had similar types of power.
Yeah, and the epilogue of the Voltron from Days of Long Ago, a 30th anniversary celebration, suggests that the name of the energy planet is Voltronix, IX at the end. Um,
Mm-hmm.
who knows? I don't know how closely that follows any of Todd Garfield's notes, but it is tantalizing to try to imagine what could have been in the second season.
Yep.
So, what do you think would have happened in season two, Angie?
So, like you were mentioning the epilogue comic, I did read that one, which I think was very cool for a setup. But I was also like really sad, to be honest, because not only did they basically have to ditch Allura because she was now queen, they can't take her with. She's too much of an important figure. And yeah, like how Mark is showing, basically Vince gets Nick Furied. He becomes blind in one eye,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
interesting, and I kind of feel like he should have been blinded entirely just because he finally grew into himself both as a person, then as a pilot, and then all of a sudden one of the biggest like senses for him, his sight, taken away from him, gone. And then not to mention by Hagar, who is like the biggest bad. Like if Mayhaps was bad for them, Hagar is even worse again. And she's already known, she has history with the team too, so it's like insane.
Hmm. I I still wonder whether what happened to Vince would have happened in that way or at all, because it is the whole setup is so much darker than anything we got out of the first season. And maybe it would have happened. I don't know, but my goodness, I mean, seeing Eris laid to waste in that epilogue in that book, and so many awful things, and seeing Daniel standing alongside Lotor at the end, and Hagar. My goodness, if the second season were to have been anything like that, my goodness, what a change.
So I just wanted to read this passage from the the comic at the end of the book here.
Okay.
The Road Beast destroyed Eris. By the time we were able to form Voltron, the damage was already done. The losses were immense. Faced with this new threat, we formed a plan. The only way to match Hagar's strength would be to upgrade Voltron. We would look for the source of the robot's power. Voltronics, a planet on the edge of the far universe that existed only in myth. That was really good.
Yeah. But this episode specifically, just, focusing only on this episode, yes, lore packed. I love the character growth with Vince. Still the fun humor and banter with Lance and Keith, and just fun stuff. I really like this one. It's one of the better ones, I think. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I agree. The whole idea of having to go through trials and go through all these chambers and stuff like that reminds me a lot of like Indiana Jones, or some of the things that they had to do when Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade occurred, and he had to go through the 3 trials at the end to get to the little area where the Holy Grail was.
Mm-hmm.
And that just, to me, is a lot like this one.
So we need a Harrison Ford to appear and say, Hegarium. Why did it have to be Hegarium?
New one came out, didn't it? Like just now or recently?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, the Dial of Destiny. Yes.
There's hope. There's hope, all I'm saying.
That's true.
There's hope for a Voltron movie.
I'm so excited. I'm friends with Natalie. I know she was on the show and she's been to Volcon before, so she's like one of my best friends. Natalie, I know you're watching this. I love you.
Go, Natalie.
But what's it called? When you guys, or in Volcon, when they first showed the trailer, obviously she didn't have her phone on her, but she tried to describe it as best she could. It's so interesting to me that we're going to get a live action, because obviously, and I'm like comparing it a little bit to Voltron Force, because Voltron Force tried their best with 2D. 3D obviously didn't work all the time, and especially to new viewers, it clashes really hard. Voltron Legend Defender, which was 6 years later, they did a fantastic job with 2D, 3D. Like, I couldn't even tell that Voltron itself was 3D.
Right.
And then now we're getting a live action, so I'm like, okay, so we're basically, I can't remember I don't remember who signed on, like what company signed on to help with to help with the production, but how are we going to do CG for the lion?
I was just going to say it was Amazon.
Yeah. So Amazon obviously is a big company, so I'm like, all right, how good are the CG lions going to look? How is like the actors? Obviously, I'm thinking that either way they're going to do a good job, because it's a movie, that's their job, right? I'm just mainly focused on the lions and the team dynamic, because from what I understand, it's basically a whole new Voltron again. It's a more modern take.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's so, as far as we know anyway, it's so early in the process. It's anyone's guess as to what's going to materialize or when. I just hope that, well, they can't be any worse visually in terms of visual quality than the dinosaurs from the first Power Rangers movie. I just hope the styles are better than the styles of the Zords in the second, or the most recent Power Rangers movie, because those things are just hideous looking.
Right.
But anyway, I hope it's still recognizable, and and kicks all kinds of butt.
We'll see. We have no idea when it's going to be, but hopefully within the next few years.
Yeah, let's hope.
Yeah. So I want to thank you, Angie, for joining us on this episode of Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is such a big honor, honestly. Like I said, I've been following you guys for a long time, and I've been going through your old Voltron Force centric episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting bits and pieces from that, and I'm hearing from voice actors, and then I believe Ted, I think, was on one of the episodes, or at least he was with you for one. So it's always nice to hear from him. So this is just huge for me, especially as a fan too. I'm like, oh, I'm finally part of Voltron as I wanted to be, right?
Well,
Mhm.
we're so happy to have you on. Your enthusiasm and your knowledge of Voltron, new and old, is very impressive. I should have guessed that you were one of Natalie's friends because she's my goodness, she's so sharp with that stuff. So yeah, maybe we can have the both of you on at some point to review an episode. Who knows? But in any case, for tonight, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
And we'll see you all next time on
Let's Voltron.
Let's go.